This presentation is brought to you from the Ivory Coast Economic Development Team, represented by Chima, Juan, Daniel, Susan, and Allison, to present to you the Organization of African Unity on why the Ivory Coast is the best candidate to receive a $10 billion grant to be incorporated into the proposed Economic Development Plan. We have defined how the $10 billion grant will be implemented into the following categories: internal and export markets with 20% of the funds, poverty levels with 20% of the funds, population structure, demographic, and patterns of land tenure system with production with 20% of the funds, gender and ethnic challenges with 20% of the funds, agriculture and economic systems with 20% of the funds. Each problem, we have proposed a solution that can be delivered with proper funding to further stable economic development for the Ivory Coast. In April 2013, the French oil and gas company Total discovered oil in the waters of the Ivory Coast. Although oil is not something new for this country, this was the biggest finding ever made. Oftentimes, there is a problem with countries that are exposed to enormous amounts of wealth because of a mismanagement of money. However, with no oil industry, the country would have no solid industry to fall on. Therefore, its economy will falter. A solution to prevent this from happening would be to supply $1 billion in funds towards the amount of aid and legislation making dependent on the Ivory Coast restricting the amount of oil extracted. Then it will work. The Ivory Coast would have to agree to monthly site inspections and weekly reports, along with being financially transparent. The legislation would also have to require the Ivory Coast to use at least half of the money it produces from oil to invest in other industries. This diversifies the economy, which makes it less probable to collapse once all the oil has been extracted. As the government is being forced to implement this preventive measure, the other $1 billion would be used to implement oil programs that involve the local population and education. Also, they would have to create an oil drilling schools, working with universities to implement STEM programs, funding university programs of research, and build schools in the rural country. Also, a program would be created to establish connection with universities from around the world to hire as interns, schools teachers for college credit, or as a study abroad program. According to the IFAD, most of the poverty is concentrated in the population of small-scale farmers, which includes a large amount of young people who are in even greater need. Furthermore, women are among those who require the largest amount of help since their social power is limited and so is their access to crucial commodities like land. The IFAD states that there is a high incidence of poverty in the north, where the potential for agriculture is not yet been realized. Increasingly, poverty and food insecurity are also affecting the forest zone in the southern part of the country. In order for a more prosperous population, certain action must be taken. First of all, the level of education must be raised by investing on affordable education, which will provide motivation for the people to achieve higher education. Education should be made more widely accessible in general, since most of the poverty of Ivory Coast is concentrated in rural areas. Another issue that must be dealt with is the fact that there is an unequal distribution of power and wealth. Therefore, a type of checks and balances should be put into place to monitor public spendings and make sure the money is going where it should. Population structure, demographic, and patterns of land tenure system and production. Land and land ownership is another thorny issue in the Ivory Coast. Land ownership is closely tied to citizenship, but also to ethnicity. In the 1960s, the Ivory Coast experienced the issue of fertile land, but no one was willing to farm it. As a result, the government imported other tribes from within the country and foreigners to come in and farm the land. In the 1970s, the then president said that land belongs to the person who farms it, and in an effort to aid immigrants in gaining control over their land, tensions escalated due to the differences in the interpretation of land ownership rights. Also, there is currently issues on the various degrees of citizenship. Just because a person is naturalized citizen does not mean they are able to just own the land. Therefore, the indigenous people feel cut off from their land due to the complications and tensions between existing communities. However, there are several solutions to this problem. The first solution is to begin to eradicate the fear of outsiders, which permeates the country through things like more education on diversity of schools. There needs to be a uniform code passed which trumps all of the others and governs land ownership and tenure throughout the country. Also, the land ownership in the country needs to be physically mapped out, and both parties come to an agreement before making the final decision. The citizenship land ownership ideas need to be eradicated as well. There needs to be an official citizenship process in the Ivory Coast. Gender and ethnic challenges. In the Ivory Coast, women commonly suffer from gender inequality and are subjected to a life that is second to that of their male counterparts. Female landowners are denied amenities from larger organizations and cooperations that are offered to male landowners. Actions like these discourage the growth of women in the agricultural industry and also even the broader working world. Women in the Ivory Coast are not only the victims of economic discrimination, but also suffer from health challenges. Ivory Coast has a population of roughly over 22 million people, and out of this number it has been recorded that 390,000 adults over the age of 15 have HIV, and 58% of these number are women. Many women are denied contraceptive options due to the lack of money or the disapproval of their husband. First, regarding the inequality between men and women in the workplace, the government should work towards creating a more corporate job world with job openings that women would be able to obtain. Also, the enactment of a law of equal wages in the workplace will close earnings and productivity gaps between men and women. In addition, incorporating training sessions that will instruct and educate women to be qualified for equal or better positions will aid in the issue of inequality in the workplace. Concerning women's health, medical clinics should be established in rural areas that function specifically towards educating and informing women of diseases and disease prevention, proper health procedures, and contraceptive information. Agricultural systems. Farmers everywhere are always looking for a way to increase crop production, even when increasing crop production can have such negative effects on the environment. In Ivory Coast, cultivators are clearing the land to benefit for themselves in an increase of crop production. However, clearing of the land has numerous negative effects, such as soil degradation, flooding, landsliding, and a decline in the natural soil fertility caused by deforestation. Another problem that occurs in the Ivory Coast is the inefficient agricultural water system. To resolve this problem, the Ivory Coast agricultural funding will go towards sustainable enhancements and education to promote sustainable economic development. First, sustainable enhancements will include the implication of genetically modified crops and improving the agricultural water system infrastructure. Although a lot of depletion has taken place, incorporating genetically modified crops that are tolerant to specific conditions such as drought, heat, and flood, it will allow the agricultural industry to be more resilient to climate and location variability. Improving agricultural water management by expanding and improving integrated areas to incorporate efficiency will become highly beneficial in increasing crop production. To make sure sustainable enhancements are implemented in the right way, education will be incorporated to follow up the agricultural sustainability. Education is a need for farmers to understand the use of technology advances such as GMOs in irrigation. Ultimately, by incorporating sustainable enhancements and education, Ivory Coast will seek an increase in agricultural productivity and will be highly beneficial for Ivory Coast agricultural industry. In conclusion, there is a way for the Ivory Coast to become a leading economic country in Africa. If the aid from the Organization of African Unity is granted, Ivory Coast will be able to implement these proposed resolutions and education programs. And with these solutions, there is nothing to stop the Ivory Coast from becoming one of the most developed countries in Africa.